The film begins aboard a Russian research ship crossing the ocean during a mission. Among the crew, we meet Captain Alexei and his wife, Dr. Nadia, who work together on the vessel. The research team on Earth follows the mission of the Russian astronauts on the space station. Captain Yuri and his crew receive data sent by Nadia and continue with the experiments. Everything seems normal until an anomaly is detected approaching the station. Yuri and his team observe the phenomenon, which passes through the structure while releasing a powerful energy discharge. Shortly after, communication with Earth is interrupted. Over the radio, only screams and interference are heard before total silence. Then, an energy emission is fired from the station, and something unknown is launched toward Earth, hitting the ship's systems and causing a general failure. In the middle of the system collapse, Nadia realizes that there is an attempted invasion in the control center and alerts Alexei. He is surprised and states that this should not be possible, since only he has access to the main code. Then, an unknown force throws everyone who tries to operate the computers. Panic spreads through the station, while communication breaks down completely. Days later, in the South Pacific, during Typhoon Leah, Captain Robert Everton and his crew face a powerful storm while towing a damaged freighter. Even with extremely violent winds, the operation continues under tension. As water invades the vessel, Robert remains calm and instructs his team to stay on course. Suddenly, a gigantic wave hits the ships with full force. The impact of the wave causes serious damage to the vessel. The mast falls and hits the upper deck, blocking access and leaving the door completely jammed. The structure also suffers serious damage, compromising the engine room, which is quickly noticed by engineer Steve Baker. Richie and Hiko arrive at the site and realize that the situation is more serious than expected. Richie warns that they need to act fast before water invades the compartment. Steve instructs them to try to clear access to the deck while he goes to the captain. Foster suggests changing course to escape the typhoon, but Robert remains silent. Soon after, Steve reports that the engine room is already flooding and demands a decision. Robert confronts him, but Steve explains that there is no way to act since the upper deck is blocked by the mast and the team is still trying to clear the passage. Steve realizes that the freighter remains attached to the tugboat even with the critical situation. He and the team argue that it is necessary to release the vessel, since staying connected to it could drag everyone to the bottom of the sea. Robert, however, refuses to abandon the cargo, stating that he will take the risk. Faced with Steve's insistence on cutting the cables, the captain reacts by drawing a gun, and the confrontation intensifies. Steve then questions what is so valuable in that cargo that so many lives would be put at risk, and Robert reveals that he invested all his own money in the operation. Before the situation can be resolved, a violent wave hits the ship and knocks everyone onto the deck. With the impact, the cables finally break and the freighter comes loose, relieving the crew, but leaving Robert furious over the loss. After the tension in the cabin, Steve makes it clear to Robert that he will not accept any more threats, and that there will be consequences if it happens again. Woods suggests following the route indicated by Foster, and the captain, still shaken by the loss of the cargo, ends up agreeing. The next day, the crew works to repair the damage while commenting on the captain's attitude. Squeaky dives to check the hull and returns with terrible news. The ship is slowly sinking, increasing the general concern. When they analyze the supplies, they discover that the food will only last about 4 days. During the meeting, Foster detects another ship stopped nearby on the radar and tries to make contact, but gets no response. Meanwhile, Richie notices the captain's absence. At the same time, Robert, in deep despair, considers taking his own life after the loss. Woods interrupts him by informing him about the ship, about 15 kilometers away. Initially indifferent, Robert soon begins to see it as a possible chance of survival and profit. As they approach, the group identifies it as an old Russian research vessel. They observe destroyed lifeboats, suggesting a hurried escape. Woods tries to contact possible survivors, but gets no response. Only then does Foster reveal that the ship is the Vladislav Volkov, a vessel used for missile and satellite tracking. With no immediate signs of threat, Robert decides that the team must board. Steve and Squeaky go ahead while the others move forward right behind them. The atmosphere becomes tense when they notice bullet marks on the hull, but they continue exploring in search of survivors. Inside the command cabin, they find the place completely destroyed. Steve locates a log in Russian, but cannot understand it and sets it aside. During the search, the group begins to consider the possibility of a reward for the ship, and Robert promises payment to anyone who helps, while Foster shows no interest. Even with Foster's refusal, the captain orders Steve and Squeaky to find the generator to reactivate the ship's systems. Meanwhile, Richie must reconnect the freighter to the tugboat and keep the vessel stable against the wind. Foster refuses to participate, stating that they cannot claim the ship if there are survivors on board. Robert reacts with irony, making a disguised threat about eliminating possible survivors, but soon says he was joking. On the way to the generator, Steve and Squeaky comment on the condition of the ship and try to understand what happened to the crew. Steve distrusts the captain because of the money involved in the operation. Squeaky agrees, saying that no one there should be fully trusted. When they reach the engine room, Steve fixes the failures and Squeaky restores power to the ship. However, the return of electricity also activates strange machines hidden on board. Meanwhile, metallic sounds and sparks begin to appear throughout the vessel, but Robert ignores the signs. During the towing operation, Foster notices that something seems to be controlling the ship. Soon afterward, an anchor is activated by itself and violently launched against the other ship, almost hitting Hiko, who manages to escape. Richie alerts the team and everyone runs to check the situation. Steve takes control of the operation and leaves Squeaky responsible for the engine room, asking him to run if anything gets out of control. With the ship sinking, Hiko ends up injured in the leg during the chaos and is at risk of drowning. In desperation, he asks Woods for help, but the sailor prioritizes his own survival and moves away with flotation equipment, leaving Hiko behind. Foster tries to intervene, but is stopped by Richie. Soon after, Steve returns and throws himself into the water, managing to rescue Hiko while the tugboat continues being swallowed by the sea. Later, Richie suspects that the anchor did not fall by accident, but was intentionally activated. While Foster tends to Hiko, Squeaky gets in touch to find out about the situation. Steve reports that they lost the tugboat and asks about his colleague's condition. Squeaky says he is fine and comments that the ship seems to operate on its own, but Steve disagrees and believes that someone is still controlling the vessel. Steve tries to get Squeaky out of the place, but he decides to stay. With the ship in crisis, Steve suggests splitting the group to speed up the search. However, Robert resumes command and insists that he is still the captain, ignoring Steve's protests and putting the reward above everything else. He still provokes Steve, questioning whether he would also be willing to go all the way for the money, and his silence is interpreted as agreement. Then, Robert separates the team, sending Richie and Woods to the engine room to help Squeaky. Meanwhile, he and Steve take Hiko with Foster toward the infirmary. The groups spread throughout the ship in search of answers. Richie and Woods move through the corridors without realizing that they are being watched by a robotic spider. In another area, Squeaky hears strange sounds and ends up being drawn toward a mechanism that manipulates cables in the environment. While investigating, he believes he is dealing with a possible survivor, but ends up being surprised and dragged away by hidden mechanical structures. Meanwhile, the group accompanying Hiko reaches the infirmary and begins treating his wounds. Richie and Woods end up finding an armory marked by signs of confrontation and decide to equip themselves before continuing. Soon after, they discover an area with missiles and military equipment, but the large amount of blood in the place makes them retreat immediately. In the infirmary, during a conversation about the mission reward, Steve notices a camera monitoring the environment. While investigating, an armed and masked figure emerges from inside a compartment and opens fire on them. Steve reacts quickly and manages to neutralize the attacker after a direct confrontation. Steve removes the attacker's mask and reveals that she is Nadia. The discovery leaves everyone surprised because they believed no one had survived. When checking her vital signs, he confirms that she is still alive, raising concerns in Robert. In another part of the ship, Richie and Woods find signs that someone has been manipulating the vessel's systems. At that moment, Steve reports over the radio that he has lost contact with Squeaky, asks them to begin searching, and warns that he will also look for him. During the search, the two are attacked by a mechanical creature. Richie manages to shoot it down quickly, but the being's strange appearance leaves the pair completely puzzled. In the infirmary, Nadia wakes up completely desperate and insists that the ship's power be turned off as soon as possible. Then, she tries to grab a chocolate on the table, frightening the group, who for a moment believe she was going to reach for a weapon. When questioned, she reveals that the entire crew died and states that the threat needs energy to keep functioning. Not understanding what she means, Robert believes she is out of her mind. Taking advantage of a moment of distraction, Nadia escapes from the infirmary, grabs an axe along the way, and heads toward the generator room. Foster goes after her and, upon finding her, notices that her hands are covered in a red substance. Foster convinces Nadia to drop the axe and tries to gain her trust. During the conversation, Nadia introduces herself as the ship's chief science officer. When questioned about the fate of the crew, she explains that many died and the rest disappeared, leaving Foster unable to understand how this could have happened. Nadia then reveals that it all began during a transmission to the Mir space station, when an unknown entity invaded the vessel's systems. What seemed like a simple failure ended up taking control of the computers and learning how to eliminate humans. She says that only she and Captain Alexei managed to resist for some time. Finally, she reveals that the threat is made up of machines, but Foster remains skeptical of the story. Robert and Hiko find Foster with Nadia. Although Robert believes she has lost her sanity, Foster argues that her behavior is the result of the trauma she experienced. Even so, the group decides to restrain her and take her to the bridge, while she insists that she is not a threat. In another part of the ship, Richie and Woods find a strange laboratory where machines build new creatures. Richie cuts the power to the workshop, but Steve soon orders him and Woods to abandon the exploration and head to the engine room. As soon as the pair leaves the place, the power is restored, and the production of the creatures begins again. Shortly afterward, Richie notices that the workshop is working again and decides to return. Alongside Woods, he finds several small robots and approaches to observe them. The curiosity costs him dearly because one of the machines reacts immediately and fires a shower of nails, injuring both of them. Richie manages to destroy it, but another hidden attacker begins shooting at the pair. Unable to see who is attacking, they believe it is one of the ship's crew members and retreat. As they fall back, Richie reports over the radio that they were attacked, that Woods is injured, and that there may be another survivor on board. Irritated, Steve orders them to abandon the search and go straight to the engine room, an order that is finally obeyed. Steve finally arrives at the engine room, but finds the entrance completely sealed, concluding that Squeaky may be trapped inside. While trying to open the door, Richie and Woods appear and report the attack by the machines. Shaken, Richie argues that the best thing would be to destroy the ship, but Steve prefers to keep looking for his companion before taking any action. Shortly after, Woods notices an unusual odor and alerts the others. A silhouette appears ahead, making Steve and Richie believe they have found Squeaky. The hope does not last long. The figure opens fire on the group, forcing the three to take cover and return fire. On the bridge, Robert pressures Nadia to reveal what happened to Squeaky, but she insists that the only way to survive is by turning off the ship's power. Foster tries to defend her, but Robert remains suspicious and even threatens her with a gun. At that moment, Steve returns with Richie and Woods carrying a destroyed cyborg. Nadia recognizes him as Captain Alexei and is shaken. Faced with the situation, Foster asks her to explain everything. Nadia reveals that the threat began with small machines, but soon started transforming people into dangerous cyborgs. Not understanding Nadia's insistence, Foster asks for an explanation. Nadia reveals that the entire threat depends on the ship's energy to remain active. Steve takes the opportunity to ask what is really behind all of it, since he had to cut several cables to remove the cyborg. She explains that the entity is a life form composed of energy, without a body of its own, that uses human beings to manufacture a new race of machines. While the conversation takes place, Richie decides to examine the cyborg more closely. When he finds a strange component in its head and manipulates it, he ends up reactivating the creature for a brief moment, causing a great scare. Steve immediately scolds him and tells him to move away. Nadia approaches the cyborg in the hope that Alexei is still alive, but the creature wakes up and attacks her. Steve and Hiko manage to restrain it, and soon Nadia reveals that the man was her husband. Even after the scene, Robert continues believing that everything is part of a Russian experiment. Soon after, a huge wave shakes the ship, and the controls stop responding. Steve concludes that it will be necessary to reach the engine room, even with the entrance blocked. Robert orders the group to solve the problem, while he stays with Nadia. Before they can leave, the cyborg rises again, but Richie eliminates it before it can attack. The group decides to go together to the engine room to try to reverse the situation. On the way, Foster notices that the ship is changing direction without human control, and Nadia reinforces that this is the work of the entity that took over the system. They move forward until they are interrupted by noises coming from a door. Steve believes Squeaky may be there and insists on checking, opening the compartment despite the protests. Inside, he finds Squeaky transformed into a cybernetic version, still conscious, but soon a much larger creature appears behind him, spreading panic. In the confrontation, Woods is captured and killed by the creature, being thrown against the group. Richie reacts by shooting, while Nadia finds an exit and everyone manages to escape in a hurry. Squeaky, still altered, continues calling for Steve. Nadia reveals that she and Alexei destroyed the communication systems to contain the threat. As the creature approaches, Richie manages to recover a radio, but Robert destroys it, stating that no one will keep the ship. Foster reacts, knocks him down, and takes control of the situation, freeing Nadia. Richie tries to contact the entity using the ship's computer and manages to establish communication. The creature manifests itself and declares that humans are a threat, treating them as a virus to be eliminated. Even with attempts at negotiation, it makes clear that it intends to transform them into new cyborgs. Faced with this, the group prepares to fight. Hiko proposes sinking the ship to destroy the threat, but the idea is rejected by the group. Nadia then reveals that the system core is one level below, on the lower deck. In the midst of planning an escape, Richie considers using the ship's heavy weapons, but Squeaky reappears already completely corrupted. He is quickly neutralized by Richie, who panics over the situation and decides to open a passage using explosives. The group follows through the opening, while Robert refuses to accompany them and remains there, showing contempt and abandonment. After the others leave, he tries to negotiate alone with the entity, which responds and directs him to the control room. Richie reaches the missile area determined not to be captured and begins assembling an improvised explosive. When attacked by a small robot, he reacts quickly and destroys it, using parts of the machine itself to reinforce the bomb. Meanwhile, the group tries to reach the central computer, but discovers that it has been removed from its place. In another part of the ship, Robert finds a laboratory where the creatures are being mass-produced. Showing no surprise, he observes the process while the entity reveals itself and tries to convince him to cooperate to ensure his survival. Foster and the group realize that the ship is sealing the accesses, forcing an escape while they try to reach the central computer. A giant robot appears again, forcing everyone to fight and retreat until they find a ladder leading to the upper level. They manage to escape, but the path to the tower room is dangerous, and Foster almost falls, being saved by Hiko, who ends up being carried away by the structure. Even wanting to go back, Steve stops Foster, and the group continues, although she still believes he may have survived. Meanwhile, Richie continues preparing explosives to destroy the ship. The group also discovers that the vessel is heading toward the Lord Howe region, where there is a British intelligence station with access to military networks, which may be crucial to the outcome of the crisis. Foster warns that, if the creature reaches the Pacific transoceanic cable, it could spread globally. Soon after, the group receives contact from the ship Norfolk, which confirms the distress signal and begins tracking the vessel. Steve suggests a flare, but Foster refuses so as not to involve another crew. With no way out, they decide to destroy the ship, and Nadia proposes setting fire to the hold to sink it. During the preparations, a figure appears at the entrance and reveals himself as Robert transformed into a cyborg. He attacks, claiming he is still the captain, but the group reacts to the confrontation. Nadia uses a grenade, and Steve manages to throw him, causing him to explode and fall to the lower levels. With the danger still present, they continue with the destruction plan. When they reunite, they find Richie, who behaves strangely and moves away from the group, while the others continue with the mission. Foster releases fuel throughout the area, while Steve and Nadia place a bomb with a timer. They prepare to flee, but Richie ignores the warnings to leave. The giant robot returns and begins a heavy attack, leaving Steve and Nadia unconscious. Foster is also captured after falling amid the spilled fuel. When she regains consciousness, she realizes that she is being subjected to experiments and refuses to reveal information about the detonator. Then, she suffers attacks from the creature. Steve and Nadia try to face it without success, until Richie appears and attacks the robot with an explosive strike. After that, he helps free Foster. After the confrontation, the giant robot attacks again and knocks down metal structures, forcing the group to separate. The women manage to hide in a life jacket room, while Steve tries to help Richie, who is gravely injured. Before dying, Richie instructs them to use the ejection system in the missile room as the only means of escape. Steve goes to carry out the plan, while Foster and Nadia try to decide the next step. At that moment, the robot reappears again, showing that it has found the bomb. The entity declares that it has won, while Nadia insists that Foster flee and tell what happened. Foster insists on staying, but Nadia forces her to escape and sacrifices herself, being captured by the creature. Amid the chaos, an explosion is caused to try to contain the enemy's advance, allowing Foster to escape. She ends up reuniting with Steve, and the two run toward the missile room to use the ejection system as their last chance of escape. Even while being chased by the creature, they manage to activate the device, but it only holds one person. When the creature reaches them, Steve decides to stay behind to stop it, but Foster grabs him against his will and activates the ejector, causing the two of them to escape together at the last instant. Soon after, the final explosion destroys the ship. The next day, Foster and Steve are rescued, surviving the events.